afternoon. This is Veterans Issues, and I'm Jim Edge. Today our guest is an old friend of Veterans Issues, Congressman Bernie Sanders. Congressman, I got some stuff from your office, and I've heard that you've really got something moving on this Gulf War syndrome, finally.
Well, we hope we do, and I'd like to discuss that.
Let's go for it. You're going to get an independent counsel to look at this for a change? Or?
Well, here's what's going on. For the last 6 years, research into Gulf War illness has been conducted primarily by the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration. And I see you laughing already. I haven't even said anything and you're laughing. And I think it's fair to assess the situation. And what we can say is if you got on the phone now and you called up Washington and said to the VA and the DOD, can you give me an understanding of the cause of Gulf War illness, they would say, we don't know. And if you'd say, can you tell me how you're treating patients other than symptomatologically, they would say, we have no treatment, basically. And I think 6 years is enough time to determine that they have not done a good job. And not only have they not done a good job in understanding the cause of Gulf War illness or developing a treatment, as you'll remember, Jim, from the very beginning they were reluctant to deal with the issue. When people came home from the war and vets were saying, I'm not feeling well, something's wrong with me, but they were saying, you're a malingerer. There's nothing wrong with you. Go back to work. Don't try to get these benefits. And more vets began to complain about a myriad of illnesses, gastrointestinal illnesses, memory losses, sexual problems, skin rashes, a whole bunch of stuff. Then what they said is they finally concluded, yeah, there is an illness, but the only cause that we know of it is stress, and that's it. Well, I think stress is part of any problem. Stress is a serious business. But what we have found in recent years is that independent academic types have been doing studies, and what they have begun to discover is that our vets were exposed to many types of chemicals over in the Gulf. The military theater there was a chemical cesspool. So what you had is very heavy dosing of pesticides, of insecticides. People were using leaded gas. There were the oil fires that Saddam Hussein had started. People were given different vaccines, and perhaps most significantly, over 200,000 vets received pyridostigmine bromide as an anti-nerve gas agent. In other words, they were anticipating the possible use of nerve gas on the part of Iraq. So they gave these guys pyridostigmine bromide, which they had gotten from a waiver from the FDA. It had never been used for this purpose before. Well, what some independent researchers are beginning to find is that the synergistic effect, the combination of pyridostigmine bromide with certain types of insecticides and other types of chemicals are developing symptoms in animals not terribly different from what our soldiers are suffering. So it seems to me there's a line of research that we should be vigorously pursuing. Now, what I managed to do just a few days ago as part of the labor HHS bill is get $7 million, which would go to the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is not part of the DOD, which is not part of the Veterans Administration, and the head of that agency, Dr. Kenneth Olden, promised me that they would take the issue of chemicals as a possible cause of Gulf War illness rather seriously. There are other people doing important research all over this country. There are certain doctors who are beginning to come up with certain types of treatment that the VA has not been sympathetic to. So we hope now to begin to move forward in an area that the DOD and the VA have not been sympathetic to, and to look at what kinds of treatments are out there that we might be able to avail veterans of.
This is the first time we've been down this road. Vietnam, we're down it with Agent Orange. I'm sure there's something from the Second World War. Probably they were telling people in the First World War that mustard gas wasn't going to bother them. What is the reasoning behind this denial all the time?
Well,
I thought we're all on the same team.
Yeah, that's right. And people write big books about this. I don't know all the answers. I'll just give you my own, off the top of my head, thoughts. Number one, what you're talking about is absolutely true. As you'll remember, after World War II, when the government did testing of atomic bombs, you remember those pictures of these guys? I mean, it's really, you look at it now, it's a pretty sad
I saw it on live TV at my age.
Really? All right. So there they have these guys watching these atomic bombs with all the radiation around there. And even at that time, of course, we didn't know as much about nuclear weaponry and radioactivity as we know today. But even then, scientists were saying, there's a problem. But the government was very, very reluctant to admit the health hazards associated with exposure to radiation. and dragged its feet for many years. And as you know, soldiers had to fight very hard to get benefits as a result to cover the sicknesses that they developed. And then we went through Agent Orange, where the DOD was just horrendous, and it took some very brave souls in Congress and veterans organizations to fight and fight and fight to discuss what that very powerful herbicide did in terms of human health. And now we're back to Gulf War illness. Now, I think in terms of the Persian Gulf War, I think the dynamics are that militarily the victory was much stronger than anyone could have believed. I mean, in terms of the loss of life, much less. In terms of the actual number of people wounded on the battlefield, much less. So everyone came home with the big parades, and everyone was really delighted by it. And I think there was a reluctance on the part of the Pentagon to say, well, you know, maybe this victory is not quite as sweet. Maybe a lot more people were hurt than we had thought. That's number one. Number two, there is a fierce debate, not only within the military, but within civilian medicine, within the AMA, about the role that chemicals play in making people ill. I don't know how much familiarity you have with the issue, but there's a whole area of science called multiple chemical sensitivity. And there are many, many doctors, and I've spoken before groups of hundreds of them, who basically treat people who have been made ill by chemicals. And there can be chemicals in rugs, there can be chemicals in indoor air, air pollution and so forth. And people get sick. That issue is hotly debated within medical circles today. So it is not so surprising that you're going to see it with some reluctance, the Pentagon wanting to acknowledge that. It sounds pretty strange to be made ill by chemicals. Really? Well, so that's a hotly debated issue, and the Pentagon has been quite conservative on it. So that's some of the reasoning.
A lot of this stuff, though, is after the fact, whereas in some of the committee hearings I watched on television, they were talking about during the war itself, during that brief period, nerve gas alarms were going off and people were reporting it, and at division level or above, they were saying there is no such thing.
Exactly.
What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, what you had, I'm on a committee which is chaired by a guy who, in my view, is doing just an outstanding job. His name is Chris Shays from Connecticut. And we had Chris's staff member come up and speak to the Veterans Conference that we held a number of months ago. And Chris has held a number of hearings where he's brought almost everybody involved with this issue in one way or another. We brought a fellow in who his job was to monitor very sophisticated instruments which detected chemical presence. That was his job. And he said, yeah, I'm sitting here, I'm trained to do this, I have state-of-the-art equipment, and I'm telling you that the alarms went off and we registered this. But as you indicated, as it went up the ladder, people were saying it wasn't there. Now, I can't tell you why. Their official line is that if you are hit with nerve gas, you know it. I mean, we remember some of the pictures. You know, this guy Saddam Hussein is one of the practitioners in modern history to have used nerve gas against the Kurds and against others. And you may have seen pictures of people, they're dead. So that type of warfare did not take place. And what the Pentagon was saying is, well, if we don't have people who are keeling over, if we don't have people who are really suffering acute symptoms, you know, losing their eyesight, suffering terrible burns, then we think there is not a problem. It appears that at the very least, and there is still controversy over this, in other words, right now, the official position is, and I don't have enough information to contest it, the official position is that Saddam Hussein did not, in an offensive way, use chemical weapons. On the other hand, what is now widely acknowledged, although it wasn't initially acknowledged by the Pentagon, is that when we blew up Arms Depot, at an Arms Depot at Qamishiyah, there was a release of chemical agents. Now, initially with the Pentagon, they denied it completely, and then they said, yeah, actually, something did happen in Qamishiyah, 500 troops were exposed. And then a little while longer, they said, well, actually, it was 5,000. And now, after the CIA did all their analysis or whatever, now they think the plume may have impacted some 100,000 soldiers. So now what the debate is, what about low-level exposure? Now their official position is, it's not a problem. But there are many scientists, including we had a fellow who lives in Vermont part-time, who's connected to the Harvard Medical School, says, that's nonsense. low-level exposure, especially in combination with other factors, can cause long-term illness as well. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at right now.
But still, this ammo dumping stuff was like 4 days after the war was over, right? How about the alerts and alarms that were going off while the war was going on that Schwarzkopf says nobody ever told me they heard any?
That's right. I mean, that's true. And on top of that, there was the bombing of Baghdad and chemical factories where presumably stuff was released into the air as well. And there is debate as to how far those plumes went. But in other words, when this guy manufactures chemical weapons, and when you bomb those factories, there is a danger. The official position has been that explosion and the destruction of those factories did not result in any problems for our troops. Again, that is a debated issue.
Why all the denial, though? Is it a case of nobody wants to accept responsibility, or treating all these vets is going to cost a lot of money?
That's one of the arguments that people will make. That's one of the arguments. I don't want to psychoanalyze the military. All I know is that from day one, they have done an abysmal job. Every piece of information that has been made public has had to be taken from them kicking and screaming. And last time I talked to the guy who's now head of the whole program in the committee, I said, are you going to assure us today that tomorrow you're not going to be announcing another development in terms of more exposure? He said, no, I'm not going to say that. That could happen.
It's my understanding also that some of the records of some of the testing and stuff just disappeared out of lock safes and stuff.
Amazing about that. And perhaps very significantly, the pyridostigmine bromide, which was used in an experimental way, it's now only used for one illness in America, for people who are ill. It was never used in this capacity before. And they got a waiver from the FDA to use it under the proviso that they were going to keep very good records about the nature of the dosage, how often people were taking it, and what side effects might occur, and they did not do that as well. So here's what the problem is again. The problem is that you're in an environment which was a chemical cesspool. In addition to that, guys are taking all kinds of stuff. They're in very hot temperature, and they're living under great stress. Add all of those things together, some scientists will suggest that it is not surprising that all of those factors together are going to make people ill. After 6 years, today, there is still not an understanding of the cause of the problem. And in fact, a few months ago, I brought Don Edwards onto my staff. And Don has helped me on this. And we were able finally to get some information about what's happening in Vermont to our own people. And there are hundreds of Vermonters, and I met with some of them a while back, who are suffering some really bad symptoms, who are unable to do the kind of work that they used to do. In some instances, which is also frightening, and frankly, there's a debate about this. We met with a fellow who's married, and his wife used to be a jogger, used to be, healthy as a horse, and became very, very ill. And so we're hearing reports that wives are also coming down with illnesses with similar types symptoms. And there are studies now going on to see whether that's true. Now, if that's true, that becomes very scary, because then you're talking about the ability to transmit whatever it may be, followed rather than just one person getting it. And that's being studied right now. But the bottom line is, there's no question in my mind, what really angers me, at a time when we're putting launches onto Mars, right? Space probes onto Mars and into Saturn, it seems to me that the government has not said, we have a crisis here, 70,000 people are hurting. We have got to channel our resources and direct them in a Manhattan-style project. Let's really focus our energy. Let's move on it quickly. We got a crisis. Let's come up with a solution. Do we have the capability of doing that? Yeah, we do. Have we done it? No. I mean, I've seen their studies. They are giving out money. Okay, it'll be done in a couple of years. And, it's like doing a study here, doing a study here. There is no sense of crisis. There is no sense of bringing people together to try to come up with a solution and a treatment. Now, if you were sitting at the head of the VA, and I personally took a doctor from Texas who was doing some work in this area to meet with Jesse Brown, who I like. Jesse is no longer there, but Jesse's heart was absolutely in the right place. And I brought these doctors in to meet with Brown and his top medical advisors. And what these doctors said is that we are treating, we think it's a chemical problem, and we are treating vets as if it were a chemical problem, and we're having some success. Now, it would seem to me that if you were in the VA, even if you had doubts about the nature of the treatment, right, and you didn't fully understand why it would work, you would want to take advantage of it, right? I mean, you'd want to do anything that might work. There was a woman, doctor, who was right here in Northampton, Massachusetts, who had a protocol putting these guys, what she was trying to do was to see if they were sensitive to certain types of food, certain types of chemicals, and she was having some success. She got so disgusted with the rigmarole she was getting within the VA that she quit practicing within the VA. And those people who are coming up with alternative ways to treat are getting ignored or worse. You follow what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So instead of saying, well, gee, you came up with an idea, let's see if it works. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But that is exactly what's not happening. Oh, you came up with an interesting idea, good, we don't want you anymore. I mean, that seems to be their attitude. If it's a new idea, if it might work, but it's a little bit different than conventional wisdom, we don't want to follow it. So what we want to do with this money is to get those folks who are doing work, experimental work, together to see if these ideas are working. So that's some of what we're trying to do.
I think what's disappointing to me as a veteran with the VA is that was supposed to be our voice, our agency, there to help us and do for us as the veteran. Instead, in real life, 90% of the time, it's an adversarial relationship. Anything you want from the VA, it's your obligation to prove where you were, get witnesses that this indeed did wound you there. I mean, it's like, one man going to the Supreme Court to get them to fix a sore throat
That's
or something.
right. No, that's right. And here's what the problem is now. If you're in a war and you were shot, no one denies that's a wound that occurred on a certain day in the war, right? That's, in a sense, easier bureaucratically. But what happens if you were exposed to various chemicals and your symptoms popped up 4 years later, right? Not quite so easy. So I think what many of us are saying, given the nature of modern warfare and so forth, that the presumption is going to be that if somebody comes up with something that, we think may be connected to that war, we're going to give the veteran the benefit of the doubt. And that's what we should do. And that's an effort that we're trying to make right now. And especially when you're dealing with chemicals whose problems may not surface until years later, I think that's the benefit of doubt that you've got to give the veterans.
Best case scenario, this independent study comes up with some conclusive facts.
Best case scenario.
What do you think is going to happen anyway?
Before I get to best case scenario, let me give you two other what I consider to be positive facts. Number one, the General Accounting Office a number of months ago reviewed the work that the DOD and the VA were doing in terms of understanding chemical exposure, and they said VA and DA are doing a terrible job. Second issue, Presidential Advisory Committee. The President appointed a year and a half ago or so a group of scientists to assess the situation. They have now come to the conclusion that the DOD and the VA have done such a bad job that they no longer should be able to have oversight in terms of chemical exposure.
That wasn't their initial finding.
That was not their initial finding. Their initial finding, and I worked very hard to try to change their initial finding, was that stress was the problem. And now they're beginning to say, maybe not. Let's talk about the best case scenario. The best case scenario is that we bring those scientists together who are doing some serious independent research, and we begin to come up with an understanding of the causation, perhaps that it has something to do with chemicals. And once you have that understanding, which may not be the easiest thing in the world to do, but you try to come up with a treatment. You can't come up with an effective treatment unless you have an understanding of the problem. So I think what we want to do is utilize the best work that is going on all over this country, invariably outside of the VA and the DOD now, bring those people in, get more funding for them to develop a treatment. So the goal now is not esoteric, it is to try to do our best to develop a treatment which will improve life for the people.
I think what I'm asking is, even if the independent study comes up with what they feel to be some sort of conclusive proof, are the VA and the DOD going to buy into it?
And if they don't, there'll be a war. This is the point. The point, you ask an interesting question, but obviously the assumption is, if we have a governmental agency and we have serious, reputable scientists who say, this is the cause of the problem, this is a treatment that works, there will be a war in the United States Congress if the VA and the DOD do not accept that and begin implementing those policies. That would be incomprehensible. Now you're asking, we've been critical of these guys, but at that point, I don't know what one could say if they did not implement those policies.
Because I know that with the Agent Orange thing, I don't think that was, that was this difficult a problem to figure out as it is now with the Gulf War. I mean, I thought that was pretty obvious. They'd had tests and stuff beforehand, before they even started using this stuff, that they knew that the effect on humans was not good. All the instructions handling this stuff were, if you see it sprayed, were, get the hell out of the way.
That's right.
And, still we had to go through all this. And even now, it's a very, very narrow list of things that they will say, okay, that's Agent Orange. I mean, if it's a certain type of cancer, fine. If it's a different type of cancer, well, there's no proof that that was caused by Agent Orange.
Right. See, and what we don't know is the problem with all of that stuff, and why you've got to give the victim the benefit of the doubt, is we don't know enough about it. We don't know how Agent Orange combines. What happens if, hypothetically, you have absorbed Agent Orange and you work in a certain kind of environment where you're exposed to other types of chemicals? What is the synergistic effect? Nobody knows that stuff. Nobody knows that stuff. I'll give you a story, which was really a scary story. We heard from a fellow who was a flyer, a major, very bright guy from Connecticut, testified before our committee, and this was his story. He was healthy, and he was out jogging one day, and he was jogging in a compound where they had just sprayed very heavily with, I can't remember which kind, but an insecticide. He felt sick, and suddenly he started to deteriorate, and he now has Lou Gehrig's disease and will probably die. That triggered it off. So the problem, and what concerns me very much, is you may have vets today who are walking around with a whole lot of chemical damage in their bodies, who, if they come into contact with certain types of chemicals, may suffer really bad reactions. Some of the Vermont guys that we talked to, for example, one guy used to work in a service station. He was a mechanic. He can't now deal with fumes. Makes him sick, so he can't do that kind of work. Somebody else had gone to New Jersey, where there was in a place where it was very polluted. He became very ill. One guy can't be around, his wife can't wear perfume anymore. He becomes ill. You follow? So these guys have absorbed a whole lot of stuff, and they will react in ways that we don't fully understand with different type of chemicals or other types of exposures. So nobody knows. That's why you've got to give these guys the benefit of the doubt, because we don't know enough about it.
I think that is very key, though. In order for that to happen, I think the VA itself is going to have to do a 180, because that is not the way they operate. Their whole mindset is not to give us the benefit of the doubt.
But that takes us,
you prove it, we'll fix it.
But that takes us, that's not just their philosophical problem. That then gets to a question of money and their funding. Okay, and one of the reasons, I should tell you, that I voted against the recent budget agreement is that over a 5-year period it called for substantial cuts, not only in Medicare, in the administration of Social Security, but in veterans programs as well. So if the Congress and the President cut back on funding for veterans programs, and that's precisely what's going to happen. In one way or another, they're going to cut back on their services. And that's another issue that we have to be mindful of.
I was just over to the Homeless Veterans Coalition a week or so ago, saw Jim Rader over there, and they were telling us at that time, and this really intrigued me, that at the height of the Vietnam conflict, they had 250 beds there. They now have 60 beds. This is in White River. They have the exact same amount of personnel that they had all the time. That hasn't changed, but we've lost 190 beds. And we were very interested in maybe having a domiciliary there for homeless.
Having a
domiciliary for homeless vets.
Yeah.
We figured, well, if you went from 250 beds to 60 beds, must be a lot of space lying around. That's not the case. They've mushroomed out all their administrative stuff into taking up all this space. There is no space. We're down to 60 beds. And believe it or not, we've got probably 1,000 or more homeless vets wandering around Vermont that we're trying to figure out places to put them. So those figures really caught my attention. I'm sure Jim, his eyes lit up when he heard the same thing. No staff changes, but we've dropped 190 beds, and there's no space. All that space is still being used by something for something. So, I don't know. The VA has something to think about.
I think, there are two things that we've got to do. Number one, I think the veterans have got to be, and I applaud you, and actually Rutland has a very strong veterans community, for your efforts. And we have to demand accountability and cost effectiveness. And at a higher level, we have to demand adequate funding and sensible priorities in terms of making sure the Veterans Administration has the money and the resources that they need to address the problems that they have.
Do you have a committee that actually oversees them, or they just run around?
Sure. No, actually, I'm on what's called the Government Reform Committee, which has oversight. In fact, that's how we got into Gulf War. What Shays did is that he has oversight over the VA, and he wants to see how they're handling Gulf War illness. So, in fact, that's the committee that I'm on that does have oversight over that.
Other than Gulf War syndrome, what else is happening in the... I know you're pretty active in it. You get us a newsletter every once in a while on it, so veterans issues down there.
Well, I mean, in a broader sense, what's happening? I would say one of the issues that concerns me very much is not only the cuts that veterans are seeing, but there is really now a focused attack on the part of some people in government, in Congress, against senior citizens, and that's an issue that we should watch. This budget bill called for a $115 billion cut in Medicare over a 5-year period, which translated into about a $75 million cut for hospitals in the state of Vermont, which is not a good thing. There is a fierce debate going on about the future of Medicare. The Senate passed legislation that would raise Medicare eligibility from 65 to 67, which I think is a terrible idea. They passed legislation, which, by the way, did not get incorporated into law because the House did not go along with it, which would charge $5 for every home health care visit made under Medicare, which is now free. So if you had a chronic problem and you're an old person, you could pick up $10 or $15 a week, $700 a year, which is a lot of money for somebody trying to live on $8,000 or $9,000 a year. And there are other efforts, I think, in the long run, which, if implemented, would basically destroy the kind of Medicare system that we have today, which is a pretty good system. Second of all, there are a level of different types of attacks against Social Security. What you'll be hearing you have heard and will continue to hear is an effort to cut the CPI for Social Security. I think that that's wrong. If anything, in my view, especially in climates like Vermont's, the CPI does not take into full account inflation. So that's an issue. And then there's the whole issue of some people wanting to privatize Social Security and veterans cuts as well. So I would ask the listeners and the viewers to be mindful and pay attention to what's going on in Congress in terms of senior citizen programs.
We've got about a minute left, and something just occurred to me. How about a young vet's out there, served in the Gulf War, maybe something's going on with his health. He's just watched this program. What should he do?
Two things. The VA has a registry, which is obviously free. You go in there and you fill out a form and you get an examination. Take advantage of it. It's very important that you do. Second of all, we would love to hear from veterans ourselves. We have a toll-free number in Burlington. Give us a ring. But if you're not feeling well and you served in the Gulf, it's important that we know about that.
Okay. Thanks, Congressman. Thank you very, very much. That's Veterans Issue for this time.